Welcome to the Beacon Way podcast, hosted by award-winning executive team of Beacon Media and Marketing. With over 3 decades of experience, Adrian, Jennifer, and Ken give you an insider's view of what's working, what's not, and what's on the horizon for digital marketing. Grow your business today with the Beacon Way podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Beacon Way podcast. We're continuing on our Founders edition, Founders track of the Beacon Way. And so with that, today I am very excited to host Dr. Carrie Steiner. She is the founder of First Responders Wellness Center, and she's also a licensed clinical psychologist. She has 13 years of experience as a Chicago police officer, in addition to being a crisis intervention team officer and autism spectrum disorder trainer. That's a lot of big words and probably a lot of acronyms that go with all that, I imagine.
Yes.
Yeah. So she continues to work with the Chicago Police Academy in those different areas. She's also a national speaker on mental illness and police response. She's worked with the U.S. Marshals, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Department of Homeland Security, amongst many other federal and state and local agencies. So we're very, very excited to have you on the podcast today, and really just to kind of hear your story. And from what I hear, you've got some very interesting stories. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So starting off, let's just jump right in. Tell our listeners, what inspired you to start the First Responders Wellness Center? Kind of what led you to that?
Yeah. Well, I think it actually started almost on my first day of getting out of the police academy and starting on the street, because I was told that we had an officer that was killed, and I'm sorry, let's go back for a second. We had an officer that we were going to go to a wake. And so I just assumed that my field training officer, it was somebody in their family. And he was like, oh, no, it's an officer in our district that killed themselves. And I was a little taken aback, but he was like, oh, he had personal problems. But that first year, 3 officers from my district had personal problems in which they killed themselves. This year, Chicago is at 6 officers who've killed themselves, 5 that were working, that are active, and 1 retiree. And a lot of people say, oh, like, this is new. And I'm like, it hasn't been new. It's ever since I was part of the department, suicide has been a huge issue for the Chicago Police Department and officers in general. Officers are more likely to kill themselves than get killed in the line of duty. And so because I, saw that so quickly in my career, and I saw all of the traumas that not only myself and other officers went through, I started to see that there was a need, right, for a little bit more therapy and understanding of what this job was really like. And when we would have clinicians come in, I think most of us kind of poo-pooed them because we were like, you don't know what it's really like. That's really great to say that, but on the street or, it just didn't translate. But
of course,
I was, so I was like, that's really great if you're 22 years old and have had a really nice life and now you're a psychologist, but I don't think you're going to be able to speak to me when I've seen, 30 dead bodies and what that was like for me. So I think that I felt that way, is that I don't think I could speak to anybody because I think I would scare a therapist. And then in Illinois, we have the firearms identification card, which our FOID card. And that is something that you can lose if you have sought mental health treatment and have been involuntarily committed. And most people don't understand that. So a lot of officers can be scared in Illinois to get help because they're worried that maybe my therapist might think I'm crazy or I need to be involuntarily committed. And so I think that can scare them off from doing it. And so because
Mm-hmm.
of all of those things, and because I noticed I changed and my coworkers changed, I was also told by old timers, like, you should always have a second job, lined up just in case something
Oh,
happens.
wow. Yeah.
Right. And so at the time, Chicago would pay for your schooling if you got A's. And so I was like, well, I might as well go back. I already had my bachelor's, but I was like, I'll just get my doctorate and I can talk to people. So
Hmm.
I'll be a therapist. I didn't really think a lot about it, but I just figured it would be
Mm-hmm.
nice, something to go back on. But as I became a crisis intervention team officer and I was training officers on how to spot mental illness and how to help somebody in crisis, and letting them know I was going to school for this, people started coming to me and started saying, hey, I have this problem. And what you just talked about, I'm
Mm.
struggling with. And what I would
Wow.
continue to do is I would ask them, like, well, you should go and seek therapy or, go to see somebody. And they had kind of the same feeling I did, is I'm not going to talk to a civilian or a therapist, or they're not going to get it. They're
Sure.
not going to understand because they haven't done this job. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
so it just started making more and more sense that once I got my doctorate, that eventually I might, try to see first responders, because I was like, I do get it. I've been there, kind of done that. But I didn't think that, again, I was going to leave early from the Chicago Police Department. I thought I would stay at least, I'm a tier 1, so that's at least 20 years. And I thought thereafter, maybe I would do a different job. But after I had done a training class, one of the people that were in my training class called me, and I didn't really know him. I just had him in a class, for that week. He called me and he said, I have a gun in my lap and I feel like I'm going to kill myself. And
Oh,
I told,
wow.
yeah. And I told him, you should go to EAP, which is our employee assistance program, for the Chicago Police
Mm-hmm.
Department. And he said, I just left and I feel worse and they don't
Oh, no.
understand me. And I was
Sure.
thinking at that time, where can I send him where a
Mm.
psychologist or a therapist would not involuntarily commit him? Because he has a gun, he's saying he's going to kill himself. But I felt that, taking into consideration everything, this guy hardly knows me, right? He actually made an
Mm.
appointment for
Mm-hmm.
EAP, went to EAP, didn't like
Yeah.
the response, and still reached out to somebody. To me, he really wanted help and he really didn't want to
Mm-hmm.
hurt himself.
Yeah.
But I knew no matter
Mm-hmm.
where I call, he's going to be involuntarily committed. And that's going to lose his FOID
Mm.
card. And that's going to cause a whole other host of problems. And although I'm not a person that I
Right.
would rather save a life than have somebody lose their FOID card, I just felt like we
Sure.
really need a place that understands first responders, how we, what, right, like what FOID mandated reporting is, when that's really appropriate,
Mm.
when maybe it's not. And maybe I just need to sit with this guy for a little bit longer, do wraparound care, you know, things like that. And so for me at that point,
Mm-hmm.
I think it was just like, I don't think I'm doing as good of a job for my community because my community is blue and they need me. And so that's
Mm.
when I decided to leave the
Right.
department and open up a center. Now, obviously, I didn't open up a center right away. I just was like, I'm going to leave and I'm going to try to see if I can get police and fire and other people to come and see me. Um, Everybody thought
Yeah.
I was nuts because they were like, no police officer is gonna come and see you for therapy. They were like, what's wrong with you?
Right. Yeah.
And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
what is wrong with me? I don't know. But I felt like everybody kept on contacting me and asking me or saying, I have a friend who has this. What would you recommend? So I felt like I was doing some therapy, right? Just, you know,
Mm-hmm.
in the
Yeah.
halls. So I said, I just felt like it was a calling and I felt like I needed to answer it, just like I did as a
Mm-hmm.
Chicago police officer. I think people do feel like they have a calling.
Right.
I did a lot of things as a police officer. I really am happy that I was a police officer. I enjoyed my time, but the more I, put myself out there, and just by saying, hey, I, am available. I didn't advertise or anything like that. It was more just word of mouth, because I knew advertising was not going to work for first responders. They could care less if you have a doctorate or anything. They care if you understand
Right. Right.
history. They care if you
Right.
understand, what it's like to have somebody put a gun to your head, or to shoot at you,
Mm.
or to
Yeah.
see a dead baby,
Yeah.
or those kinds of things. And
Mm-hmm.
so, um, I just started to get more and more officers and firefighters and paramedics that came to me, and one would recommend another. And now I have 3 locations, and I have 15 clinicians that work for me that are also former first responders or veterans or family of first responders.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not at all what I expected. I did not think I would get this big, but it's really a needed service. Just like we have the VA for veterans and lots of veteran programs, we do not have many places
Mm-hmm.
for first responders. And although there are some places that are coming and saying, hey, we will help that first responder community, it also is still with the other civilian community. And that can make an officer
Correct. Yeah.
particularly feel really uncomfortable, because, like, I arrested him last week, or I'm scared that I might go
Exactly.
into, right? And where we are,
Yeah.
that's all we see. So that really can't happen. We also have
Mm.
one way in and one way out. We also see people for
Oh,
many different things.
interesting.
It could be therapy, a crisis appointment, education and training. So there could be lots of reasons why somebody's at our center. They can be in full
Mm-hmm.
uniform, they can be in partial uniform, they can be wearing their gun. Totally cool with that. Um, so it's
Mm.
a different place, because not many therapy centers like allow guns. you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But what an amazing way to connect with the first responders, with the officers,
Mhm.
and meet them where they're at, because that becomes that gun, that is a part of, well, their uniform, but it's also a
Yeah,
part, it's a tool that, that they use. And if they're not
yeah,
feeling safe, having that is going to help. And so,
right.
yeah, that's amazing. It's
Well, and for
really
some,
that, and I really like the one way in, one way out. That's
yeah.
very unique too.
Mhm. Well, for some also, especially our federal employees, they have to carry 24/7. So to tell them you can't bring in your
Oh, gotcha.
weapon actually is a violation of their
Hmm.
policy. So,
No
you know,
kidding. Yeah, I didn't know
yeah, some
that.
people don't
Yeah.
realize that. Or if you're an on-call person, I mean, I'm sure, yes, you could put your gun in your car, but then that's also a scary thing, is just leaving a gun in a car, right? Now, obviously,
Right. That's
first
a
responders have,
liability.
right, special boxes and things like that for it. But again, it's just something that, well, what if something happens, right? As a first responder, you're always thinking, well, what if something happens when I go into that building, or I go into that elevator, or whatever.
Right.
So I'm like, great, have your
Yeah.
weapon, be ready to go,
Yeah.
fine.
You're ready. Yeah. Ready for
Mhm.
whatever comes. Hmm.
Yeah. 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 So we try to make it
Yeah.
a very
That's
comfortable
really amazing.
environment. But we also don't, um, also like have all over plastered on our walls, like police and fire and all of that, because that's what you're trying to get away from. And so I have
Mm.
touches of it, so, like, hey, we care, but I don't have it plastered all over to overwhelm a person. Or if they are experiencing anxiety or PTSD, some of those things can be triggers. So they don't want to see a picture of a
Right.
squad car or a fire truck. So we try to be very trauma informed here. And that's also where,
Mm.
like, we do have one way in and one way out. We also have doors that are propped open or don't slam, because we are trying to be mindful
Mm.
that all of those things can be triggers for people who've been in shootings or who've been in precarious
Right.
situations. So we try to be really mindful of that. So our whole center is kind of set up for it to be more peaceful and relaxed. We even talk softer in the hallways and things like that. We really try to make a difference in how we approach, um, you know, how we, interact here.
It really sounds like you've thought through stuff on a very conscious and deeper level.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really special thing. Thank you for
Mm-hmm.
doing that, because
Mm-hmm.
that, yeah, I can only imagine how much that transfers over. Um, my husband was not a first responder, but he grew up in a extremely abusive home. And so I definitely understand sometimes the most unexpected and minute things
Mm-hmm.
can cause very significant triggers
Yeah.
and full blown PTSD episodes, which
Yeah.
that's part of what we're trying to help people, work
Mm-hmm.
through, not necessarily trigger them. So,
Right.
um,
Exactly.
yeah, as somebody who's inadvertently triggered somebody and
Mm-hmm.
had to work through that and learn from
Mm-hmm.
that and make adjustments,
Yeah.
that's a really powerful thing that you guys have done.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think again we just try and we're always trying to grow and figure out what else could we do to make it a comfortable environment. And so we continue to grow and do things different, especially when we find
Yeah.
something, oh, we could do this too.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, was there, like, when you think back to when you first started, like you said, you never quite expected it to go here. I think
Mm-hmm.
most of us entrepreneurs never quite expect it to go where it goes.
Yeah.
Um, Seems like we're usually trying to address a problem, and then next thing we know, it ends up being something so much bigger.
Yeah.
What was a challenge or two that you faced maybe early on that kind of really was impactful to you, and how did you overcome it?
I think that honestly, what has been challenging is to find clinicians that are, you know, first responders or former first responders or veterans, and,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, or just, finding a clinician that can work in this community. And there are lots of
Sure.
clinicians that, have a big interest. But what I didn't realize or didn't expect is that some of the clinicians actually want to come in to kind of change the officers or firefighters and change who they are. And I didn't realize that I had to,
Mm.
actually look a little bit for that and like what is the intent. I do
Mm.
feel like there is a first responder culture. And I think that in this day and age, unfortunately, we are very culturally very sensitive towards lots of different groups of people. However, not so with first responders, particularly police.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there's
Agreed.
biases there that I just didn't expect from this community.
Mm.
And so I have
Right.
learned that I have to ask certain questions and things like that to ensure that I'm not bringing somebody on that actually has biases. And so I've learned from that, in really ensuring, right, that I'm training people well, too, when they come aboard, but also really, figuring out what is the intent of why somebody wants to come aboard. And I think that when you have people that really have pure intentions and want to help this community, we have an amazing team that is so supportive, that is so willing to go above and beyond, and it's not a problem for them. And that's, the people that I
Mm.
love to have, aboard and to, be part of our company.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, how has your role kind of from founder, now you're running a bigger business that has multiple locations, lots of staff? How has that kind of evolved and changed for you? You said you never expected it to be this big. So, how have you kind of evolved and adapted with those changing roles?
Yeah, I think, I didn't expect that I was going to have to learn so much about insurance and benefits and all of these kinds of things, and just even
Right.
how to run a business, right? As a psychologist, you really just think more about like what are the techniques and things like that. So I'm a
Right.
quick learner. And so I just did a lot of self learning and figuring things out. But I don't know if that's something that everybody could do, because it's challenging things, I think that I have
Yeah.
such a passion for wanting to help this community that I invested a lot in that.
Hmm.
And I think that, I'm growing constantly as a, supervisor and as a leader and as a boss. Um, I think that, doing trainings and hearing feedback and being open to feedback from your clients, from your coworkers, from, departments is what helps you to grow. If you feel like this is the only way to do it and that's the best way and you can't have any room for anything else, I think that, you're not going to do as well. So I think that it's
Yeah.
really being open to doing things different, trying things, seeing what works, what doesn't work, and then also recognizing, my role continues to change because I am more of a leader. I've learned to have to say no because I can't take on as
Mm.
many clients. I can't take on as many testing cases. I can't do that because I'm also growing other clinicians and having to do, you
Right.
know, conversations in a business way. So it's a little different. It's not just being a clinician anymore. It's also being a business owner, which is hard to balance, because
It
I love
is.
all of it, but it's hard sometimes to say no,
Right.
you know, not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a learned skill. I think it's
Mhm.
one I'm still working on for sure.
Mhm.
Um, I definitely have to check myself, and it's helped. I have some very good people close to me that I trust enough to have given permission to be like, I need you to help me check myself. You
Yeah,
know, if I should be saying no to this, help me say no to this.
right.
Because yeah, I get into it. I get excited about it. I love what I
Yeah,
do. I was a graphic designer, brander, website developer before, I ended up being, so I love that side of it. I love the marketing side, but I also have to run the company too. So
right.
yeah, that learning to say no, that's a huge one for sure.
Yeah,
So
or just
what are some other
giving
techniques or yeah,
or just like even just handing it off and giving it to somebody else,
oh
that's
yes.
another thing that, you have to learn is, you can't do everything yourself. So it's like, how do I hand this off and how do I feel comfortable with that? But it's also about then learning communication, as well as like, this is what my vision is for it, but also allowing somebody
Mm,
else to have their own vision and see, maybe it can even be better, than what you expected. So
yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
allowing people also to grow as well. And I love to see that, to give something to somebody and then see them grow. And I'm like, oh, wow, I would never even thought of that. That's
Yeah.
awesome that you did that, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is so true. It is amazing to watch people grow and flourish.
Hmm.
And their excitement when they do it well and they're like,
Hmm.
look what I did, and it's like,
Hmm.
yes, that is such a definitely a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Are there any resources you said you read a lot, learned a lot? Is there any resources that really kind of stand out to you that were pivotal as you were kind of growing? Because we have a lot of listeners that were therapists, and have wanted, crossed over to now they're also business owners. So anything
Yeah.
that just kind of really stood out that was helpful for you?
I think that the Small Business Administration actually has a lot of
Mm.
programs that are free that you can go to and get a
Mm-hmm.
mentor and things like that. I utilized that information, but I also talked with a lot of business owners that were doing what I was doing and getting
Very cool.
their insight. And I also am involved in the Illinois and the International Chiefs of Police Association to see what are the standards, what are
Mm.
the problems. And again, I often am communicating a lot with departments and department members from the officer to the chief to understand what are the real issues that are going on so I can meet those standards. One of the things that we are doing are annual wellness visits. And when I first started, a lot of the officers were very worried that this is not confidential, that this is a fitness for duty, that this is not at all in my best interest. And so it was really like trying to help them get educated and help them understand what this really is and what it's not, gaining that trust over time with different agencies and people, and that, things didn't get back, and just developing that relationship, and that's an important thing, especially in my world, is you have to develop relationships. And I think you do for most businesses, but I think that, just thinking, well, I have a good product and therefore, that's it. That's all I have to do. It's really about forming relationships, forming bonds, going out of the way. I guess I do that. I take that extra step to make sure that it was done right, or that we followed up and that things have been accomplished. If it doesn't, or there's a problem, I really try to ensure that that would never happen again and find ways to, ensure that that doesn't. So I am a person that, is always looking for, how do we fix? How do we make better? And I think that if that's just part of your mindset, instead of going, is status quo, we're just going to keep it like it is. I don't have that mindset. I'm always thinking about, how can we grow this? How can we make it better? Even if it's going fine, how can we still make it better?
I love that. I think that's hugely key to any business development, as you said. Like, status quo is kind of a slippery slope. It's always, we say at Beacon, it's always asking what's next. How can we improve this? How can we evolve this? How can we make a better product for our clients? So I love hearing that you're doing that as well in your business. Well, we're going to kind of wrap up today, but is there anything else that you would like to share with the listeners out there?
I think that, again, just letting them know that if you are interested in and passionate about something and you want to start a business, you can do it. We have such a great ability in America to be able to do a business and make a business, and just, ensure that you are researching and have a support system. But the number one thing is to believe in yourself, and you can do it.
I love that. What a great way to wrap it up. Thank you so much. Well, thank you again for joining us today. If people want to find out more about your business and how you're helping, where are some places they can find you?
So you can go to our website at the First Responders Wellness Center, or call us at 630-909-9094.
Wonderful. And for all you listeners, we'll put that link up in the comment section when we post these, so that's easy for you all to find. So thank you, all your listeners, for joining us today. And we look forward to having you back at our next episode.
Thank you so much.
You have been listening to the Beacon Way podcast. Make sure to join us for new episodes every week. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Beacon Way on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.